The hooks you choose are one of the most critical elements when it comes to putting more fish in the boat. Not just hooking them, but also landing them. Today we're gonna do a super deep dive on the hook choice you make, why it matters, what the little subtle elements that you can choose to help pick a better hook and help suit your fishing style. So as with everything in fishing, balance is super important. There's no perfect hook, but there are some bad ones. And we're not specifically gonna name drop, but I'm going to talk about the different hooks and what either makes them good versus bad. There's more than two aspects to really kind of focus on what makes a hook good or bad, but we're gonna break down two specific things that are often overlooked that in my mind lead to the biggest results. So the first is rigidity. How stiff is that hook? In different grades of steel are gonna make a huge difference here, but how much does that hook flex? The less flex that's in a hook, the more it's going to drive hook penetration and the easier that hook's going to go into a fish's mouth. So rigidity is super important, but the problem is once you get too rigid of a hook, you can kind of, it starts to become a lot more fragile. So if it's super rigid and you apply a lot of force to it, it's not gonna bend, it's going to break. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's also true. You can have a hook that's too limber basically, and you apply any force to it all and it just bends straight out. So both extremes are bad, and we don't want to necessarily live on either of the extremes. We want a good middle ground. The second factor that we judge hooks off of is wire diameter. And again, you don't want to live on the extremes. If you've got too thin of a wire, typically it's going to bend out a lot easier, and especially when throwing bigger swim baits, if you have too light a wire a hook, you're gonna either snap it or bend it out. That hook's not going to be that strong. So we don't want a super light hook. But on the other end of the spectrum, we don't want a super heavy hook either. There's some hooks out there that are basically like having 3 flipping hooks all around them, and those are just too much. Basically, you've gotta either like set the hook on them, or like you're not gonna get a hook in that fish. So we wanna live somewhere in the middle, because not always, like we want the treble hooks to work for us in this situation. We wanna have as easy of a hookup as possible. And I don't like my odds when there's a 6-7 pounder out there and I gotta get on my toes and swing on a treble hook bait. That just spells like a recipe for disaster. So I like to live somewhere between the two extremes. So let's look at this line graph. As we've got the rigid on the horizontal axis and the wire diameter on the vertical axis. And as the wire diameter increases, the rigidity of the wire typically increases as well. Now the big difference maker is the different grades of wire. As we have a more quality wire, your wire diameter does not have to get as thick in order for the rigidity to increase substantially. So based off the different wires that are used for the hooks is going to make this line look substantially different on the graph. How does this all balance together? So we've got the rigidity on one side and the wire diameter on the other. So again, the rigidity, we don't want it too rigid because it's going to potentially snap on us, and we don't want it too limber because it's just going to bend out when we apply any load to it at all. And then also the wire diameter. We don't want super thin and we don't want super thick. We don't want super thin because it's going to either bend out or break really easy, and we don't want super thick because it's really going to hurt our hookup ratio. Now the caveat to all of this is the quality of wire that's used. So you can use a really poor quality wire, it could be super thick diameter and it's still going to bend out. And on the converse, you can have a really rigid wire that's beefy and you apply load to it and it's going to snap if it's a low quality wire. So I am looking for a super high quality wire. Hooks like the BKK Spear 21 are, and also like Gamakatsu makes their tournament grade steel. Those are great hooks because they don't bend out as easy. It's a super high quality steel, and you can get away with a thinner diameter hook. It's not going to flex way too much, and it's not going to be so rigid that it's going to snap when load's applied. So looking for a really high quality steel is very important, because this on this line graph basically has a slope of 1 to 1. It kind of flattens that curve just a little bit and allows you to get away with running a thinner diameter hook and still have the strength and flexibility needed to be able to put the fish in the boat, not bend out, not break, have great hookup ratio. So going back to our graph here, we don't want something super rigid, we don't want something super flexible, we don't want too thick of a wire, and we don't want too thin of a wire. So our ideal hook lands somewhere here in the middle, and we're just kind of looking for that hook that kind of fits all of those criteria. So that's why I choose something like the Spear 21 from BKK, because I feel like while it's not a perfect hook, it's gonna have a little bit of flex. If you hook a really, really big fish and really bully it to the boat, you can only do that so many times before that hook starts to bend. So it's not perfect, but it's the best that I've found so far. And like I said, I don't believe that there's a perfect hook out there. So you kind of have to take the good and the bad and figure out the balancing act that is treble hooks in order to put the most fish in the boat.